What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today we're talking about Gotham Knights and some of the mechanics. And I want to address a video that I published yesterday. That video I published accidentally. It had an error, but I'd already made the correction to that video and published it earlier. I was supposed to publish my Wonder Woman video, but somehow I mixed them up. So those of you who pointed out that error, shout out to you. There are a few things that are somewhat correct. I just did not word it right. Neither did I actually provide the full context of what it was that I was trying to argue against. So for those of you, pardon me for the inconvenience. We'll go ahead and dig into what is at hand today because I think it's very necessary that we talk about these things as time goes on. Because one thing about these video games in terms of the superhero class is we are gamers at the end of the day. At the end of the day, some of us have to basically state our own possibilities. We have to talk about our own preferences. But there is, a huge aspect of this conversation that we want to talk about. So in one of my videos yesterday, somebody said something about, why does it seem like such a bad thing to me that people cannot criticize Gotham Knights? I've never said people cannot criticize Gotham Knights. You probably need to watch my Gotham Knights review or maybe watch my early videos of Gotham Knights where a lot of your concerns are basically the same concerns that I've shared. But I had to come to understand this game as a game that was trying to do its own thing. Within the superhero genre, we already have almost all the different games already represented except RPGs. Gotham Knights is the only one that is, in my opinion, right now trying to get the RPG side kicked off the ground. And what's crazy is this change is very jarring for a lot of people. But I can't blame Warner Brothers Montreal. Warner Brothers Montreal want to do their own thing, so that's perfectly fine in my opinion. A lot of people saying Warner Brothers Montreal should have done specific things like Arkham are not paying attention to the fact that the Arkham developers are going ahead to make an entirely different shooter game. So if these guys can make a shooter game and not get anybody tell them, oh, you should have kept the Arkham system, I don't see any reason why Warner Bros. Montreal cannot make an RPG. But there is something I wanted to point out because I think here in our community, things are very interesting. I remember watching a reviewer talk about Gotham Knights, and they mentioned a few things about the game that I thought were actually interesting. They talked about how the game kind of misses a few things because it doesn't have the counter system. It doesn't have some kind of a block system. So most of the times when enemies are doing attacks or when enemies are in, say, an armor mode, you are in a position where you're powerless. You don't really have much to do. And I was very surprised as to all of this because I think a lot of people did not necessarily pay attention to Gotham Knights when the game was actually doing its marketing and so on and so forth. So I thought I'd bring back something that we all knew from even the time when this game was doing its marketing. This was about the counter system in Gotham Knights. May 26, 2022, last year, basically before the first half of the year was over, the developers had a Q&A on their Discord server, their Discord channel. And there, somebody asked the question and said, is there a counterattack mechanism? When Red Hood is fighting the Talon Gladiator, it looks like he's got some unblockable attacks coming in, but can you counter or block? So this reviewer actually said Gotham Knights combat was mediocre because we didn't have these elements, but did not pay close attention to the fact that the devs already had explained their combat design and methodology because they wanted it to stand out and be unique. So Jeff Eleanor, the game's producer, said, I think this is the game director, I can't remember exactly his role, I forgot. He said, so we do counter, but as you spotted, it's not a quick time event kind of way. Our combat system has regular and armored attacks, which means they can be interrupted by normal moves. So you have to counter them with piercing abilities. Some enemies also have guard block, which we counter with guard break abilities. So our combat system has these layers where you sometimes need to provide a specific answer to a specific problem. Many player power moves can't be interrupted after the warm-up animation, so you can sometimes time that to your advantage. The developers already mentioned this mechanic and talked about it specifically in their game, but I see a lot of reviewers talking about this and even some people within our ecosystem that played this game. In fact, just recently, somebody dropped a comment on this particular same issue. And I wanted to go ahead and talk about it. So JBZ, shout out to you. You're a sub here. And you said that. And I was interested in why you actually said that because some of these mechanics actually do exist in other video games. And so he said, after putting hours in the game, I can say that they dropped the ball on this game. The mechanics in the game are not really that satisfying when executed. I think that dropping the Arkham counter system to add a dodge slows down the game. It is an RPG. You are correct. It will slow down the game, but they were not trying to go the QTE route. They were going the much more challenging route where you actually have to piece the puzzle together. And it says, having your character have to stop his or her offensive mid combo because the enemy you're attacking decides to ignore your attacks and had full armored attacks that force you to use a janky dodge system is bad design, in my opinion. But Jay Busy, I can understand how you don't like this design, but this design exists in other established RPGs. In fact, it exists somewhat in the game of the year, Elden Ring. You know, enemies can ignore your attacks fully if they go into a barrage in regard to their attack patterns. It's not necessarily armor per se, but most of those attacks, whenever they ignore your attack, is definitely going to break your poise. So you can't even dodge if, say, in the middle of the attack, you're going in and they hit you with one of those, and then you're basically somewhat stunned where your controls are locked in. So if you think this system is actually bad for an RPG, then I recommend that you probably don't play RPGs, because I think this is something that a lot of folk have, in a sense, kind of misconstrued over the course of the Gotham Knights game. Because it's really interesting to see overall. And this is not a slight at anybody saying that, you don't know how to play the game. This is just a matter of preference, because clearly you prefer the Arkham system. You prefer the Arkham combat methodology, which is fine. But at the end of the day, you cannot expect every game to play like the Arkham games. In fact, you cannot expect an RPG to play like the Arkham games. That would be insane. Arkham is an action adventure game. It's like the God of War game. When Sony Santa Monica moved away from the heavy emphasis on hack and slash that was more like, say, DMC, you can't necessarily say that, the new God of War game should play like that, because yes, they're both action adventure games, but it was slightly designed in a distinct and different way. So I think this has been a big challenge for a lot of people to come into account with in regard to how different this game is, and understanding that the different genres of video games are here to just, especially the superhero genre, to actually change up how we play our games, or at least let the developers just enjoy their own, imagination of a video game. And I think this is why I liked Gotham Knights. I think I came into the game and I started to figure these things out, and I actually did follow very carefully a lot of what was going on. I remember actually making a specific video about this counter system. And so by the time they started to show the skill tree and the ability tree, it started to make a whole lot of sense. Like, okay, when an enemy goes into their armored attack, you can break it using a guard break attack. Whenever the enemy is trying to do a move that is unblockable, or, you may have to dodge, or you can use a piercing ability. This is how the developers basically layered their combat system. It is just the combat system, methodology that they were trying to implement. And it's okay to say, you don't like it. But to say that, they dropped the ball on it, to me, I don't think is a fair assessment. I think this is a combat system that's not easy to make. Many people don't necessarily know when you actually write the code base or imagine the code base for such a combat system. I think you'll probably realize, like, this is actually pretty solid, and it does stand out. I understand, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there ain't nothing that's actually even been made. This is the first RPG that we're seeing, in my opinion, at this scale from a superhero game. So it's, in my opinion, something that I think is very interesting overall. Whenever, people talk about Gotham Knights, I go back and say, I think we ought to basically leave room for games like Gotham Knights to exist. And I think the developers at Warner Bros. Montreal need to continue to make RPGs and polish and refine things that were important to gamers. Example, like, say, the traversal system. Some gamers didn't like the traversal systems. They can beef that up in their next game and make it actually much more weighty in a sense. Yes, it works to move around the world. I can understand you have an open world with these building tops. To me, I'm thinking from a developer constraint perspective, but people would love that, really weighty aspect of moving around a world like that. So that's some things that they need to do. They need to go back and tweak, maybe in my opinion, some of their their visual effects, maybe some of their enemy design, some of their world lighting and world designs. I can understand they were going for this particular area, but when it comes to market factors, the developers can actually maybe go for a much more photorealistic, design. This is why the Assassin's Creed games, even though they've been, kind of controversial, they've taken that picturesque kind of way. It's not easy for players to just go ahead and absorb, these new things. And at the end of the day, you're making your game for players. So these are some of the things I would say the developers can take into consideration and start piecing together. But by and large, I think their design is solid. I don't think it's something that they dropped the ball on. I think it's something that they actually decided that this is a way that they wanted their game to be unique and stand out so that players can actually master the systems. But anyways, I'll talk to you guys in another video. Thank you so much for watching the video. I appreciate you guys' time and audience, and hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.